Friends, tonight we're diving into the thrilling world of international metal trade. Okay, maybe not thrilling, but vitally important to how we build things in this country. We're talking steel and aluminum, the backbone of everything from skyscrapers to beer cans, and guess what? America loves to buy these metals. A lot. But who exactly are we buying from? See, it's a global market out there, and Uncle Sam shops around. Some countries are like the metal superstores, others more like your local hardware store. But understanding who sells us what and why is crucial, especially when things like, oh, I don't know, get thrown into the mix. Because folks, tariffs are like that friend who insists on paying for dinner but then forgets their wallet. Sure, they sound good in theory, but in reality, someone always ends up paying more. And spoiler alert, it's usually us. So, buckle up as we break down who's supplying America's metal habit, who's getting slapped with tariffs, and what it all means for your wallet, your job, and maybe even world peace. Because when it comes to global trade, things can get surprisingly, well, metal. Let's talk steel, baby. Specifically, who's supplying the good old US of A with this essential metal? Now, you might think China, right? Big factories, lots of production. Well, not quite. While China's a major player, they're not top dog when it comes to supplying America. So, who takes the crown? Drum roll, please. It's Canada. Our friendly neighbors to the north are the #1 steel exporter to the US. Think about that next time you're enjoying some maple syrup. That pancake breakfast might be brought to you by Canadian Steel. But wait, there's more. Brazil, the land of samba and sunshine, clocks in as the second largest steel exporter to the US, and rounding out the top 3, South Korea, home of K-pop, and apparently a whole lot of steel mills. Now you might be wondering why these countries are leading the pack. Well, it's a combination of factors: geographic proximity, trade agreements, and yes, even the quality of the steel itself. But as we'll see, this delicate balance can be easily disrupted, because when it comes to international trade, even metal giants aren't immune to the whims of politics and, you guessed it, tariffs. Alright, we've tackled steel, but what about aluminum? You know, that lightweight, versatile metal that makes up your soda cans, your foil, and even parts of your smartphone. Well, America's got a big appetite for aluminum too, and once again, we're looking abroad to satisfy our cravings. And guess who's back on top? That's right, Canada. Turns out our northern neighbors have a knack for producing both steel and aluminum. Maybe it's something in the water, or the maple syrup. But things get a bit more diverse after Canada. Russia, despite its frosty relations with the West, has historically been a major aluminum supplier to the US, and rounding out the top 3, we have the United Arab Emirates, showing that even desert nations can be metal powerhouses. Now, this global aluminum trade isn't just about who can produce the most. It's a complex web of supply chains, manufacturing demands, and yes, political considerations. And as we'll soon discover, slapping tariffs on aluminum imports can have ripple effects that stretch far beyond the price of a 6-pack of soda. Remember those tariffs we mentioned? Those pesky little import taxes? Well, they're back to wreak havoc on the global metal market. See, the US has a long history of imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, often citing national security concerns or unfair trade practices. And while the targets of these tariffs have shifted over time, some countries have become all too familiar with being on the receiving end of America's protectionist policies. China, for instance, has been slapped with hefty tariffs on its steel and aluminum exports for years. And while the aim might be to protect American jobs and industries, the reality is often more complicated. Because tariffs don't exist in a vacuum. They have consequences, both intended and unintended. They can disrupt global supply chains, leading to shortages and delays. They can drive up prices for businesses and consumers alike. And they can even strain diplomatic relations between countries. So the next time you hear about tariffs being imposed on steel or aluminum, don't just shrug it off as boring economic news. It's a global game of chess, with real-world implications for all involved. Now let's talk about Russia. As we mentioned earlier, Russia has historically been a major aluminum supplier to the United States, but in recent years things have gotten, well, a little more complicated. See, back in 2018, the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on steel imports and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports from, you guessed it, Russia. The stated reason? National security concerns. The real reason? Well, that's a whole other can of worms. But here's the thing about tariffs, they rarely achieve their intended goals. In this case, the tariffs on Russian aluminum didn't exactly cripple the Russian economy. Instead, they led to, well, a lot of scrambling. American companies that relied on Russian aluminum suddenly had to find new suppliers, often paying a premium for the privilege. And guess who ultimately ended up footing the bill for these higher prices? That's right, American consumers. So, the next time you're sipping a beverage from an aluminum can, remember that the price you're paying might just be a reflection of America's complex and often contradictory relationship with Russia. Alright, let's step back for a second and talk about the bigger picture. Because tariffs on steel and aluminum don't just impact the countries directly involved, they have ripple effects that can disrupt global supply chains, those intricate networks that bring us everything from the clothes we wear to the cars we drive. See, in today's interconnected world, products are rarely made in just one place. Take a car, for example. The steel used to make the frame might come from Canada, the aluminum for the engine block from Russia, and the electronics from Japan. It's a global assembly line. But when tariffs are thrown into the mix, this delicate balance is disrupted. Suddenly, sourcing materials from certain countries becomes more expensive, forcing companies to scramble for alternatives. This can lead to delays, shortages, and higher prices for consumers. And here's the kicker: tariffs often end up hurting the very industries they're supposed to protect. Take the US steel industry, for example. While tariffs might provide a temporary boost, they also make it more expensive for American manufacturers that rely on steel, making them less competitive in the global market. So, the next time you hear someone arguing for tariffs as a way to protect American jobs, remember that the global supply chain is a complex and interconnected system, and disrupting it can have far-reaching consequences that are often difficult to predict. Okay, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, inflation, because here's the thing about tariffs. They don't just disrupt supply chains, they also have a nasty habit of driving up prices. Think about it. When you make it more expensive to import goods from certain countries, those higher costs are often passed down the line. Importers raise their prices, manufacturers follow suit, and eventually consumers are left holding the bag. And this is where things get really interesting, because tariffs can create a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. When the price of imported steel goes up, domestic steel producers often see an opportunity to raise their prices as well, even if their costs haven't actually increased. This can create a vicious cycle of price hikes that ripple throughout the economy, impacting everything from the cost of building materials to the price of consumer goods. And while some argue that these price increases are a small price to pay for protecting domestic industries, the reality is that they often disproportionately impact lower-income households who are already struggling to make ends meet. So, the next time you're at the store and notice that the price of your favorite products has gone up, don't just blame it on shrinkflation. There's a good chance that tariffs are playing a role behind the scenes, quietly driving up prices and squeezing your wallet. Now, let's talk about something a little more geopolitical. Because tariffs aren't just about economics, they're also a tool of diplomacy, for better or for worse. And when used aggressively, they can quickly escalate into tit-for-tat trade wars that strain diplomatic relations and undermine global cooperation. Remember those tariffs the US imposed on Chinese steel and aluminum? Well, China didn't exactly take it lying down. They retaliated with tariffs of their own on a range of American goods, from soybeans to automobiles. This sparked a trade war that dragged on for years, hurting businesses and consumers on both sides of the Pacific. And while the two countries eventually reached a trade deal, the damage to their relationship was done. But here's the thing about trade wars: there are no winners. They disrupt global commerce, drive up prices, and create uncertainty for businesses and investors. And in an increasingly interconnected world, they undermine the very foundations of international cooperation that are essential for addressing global challenges like climate change and pandemics. So, the next time you hear about a trade dispute between countries, remember that it's not just about economics. It's about diplomacy, national pride, and the delicate balance of power in a globalized world. And while tariffs might seem like a simple solution to complex problems, they often create more problems than they solve. So there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour of the global steel and aluminum trade. The global metal market is complex and interconnected. Disruptions can have ripple effects worldwide, Tariffs often create more problems than they solve. They disrupt supply chains and damage relations. Navigating international trade is essential for survival. Appreciate the journey metals take to get to you. Choices about trade and tariffs have real-world consequences. Even mundane topics reveal our interconnected world.